Sometimes the most expensive seat on an airplane is the one taken from the wrong man. Gate C-18 had already begun priority boarding when Nathan Brooks reached the entrance with his 7-year-old daughter beside him. Her small hand wrapped around 2 fingers of his right hand, and a worn white stuffed rabbit tucked carefully beneath her arm. Lily looked up through the wide terminal windows at the silver aircraft waiting under the bright Texas morning sun, its polished fuselage reflecting the ground crews moving between fuel trucks and baggage carts. It was the first vacation they had taken since her mother's passing 3 years earlier, and Nathan had spent nearly 8 months quietly setting aside money for this trip, skipping new clothes, repairing neighbors' lawn equipment on weekends, and working overtime whenever he could. Their boarding passes carried 2 first-class seats, purchased with reward miles he had saved over nearly a decade. Lily smiled when the flight attendant scanned their passes. "Daddy, are we really sitting in the big seats?" she whispered. Nathan smiled back, brushing a loose strand of blonde hair behind her ear. "Just this once, kiddo." She nodded with the kind of excitement only children could carry without embarrassment. They settled into seats 2A and 2B, and Lily immediately pressed her face toward the window, watching baggage handlers load the final containers beneath the wing. Nathan placed her backpack beneath the seat, folded her light sweater neatly beside her, and quietly fastened his seat belt. Around them, other passengers chatted about business meetings, investment conferences, and vacation homes. Nobody paid much attention to the father wearing faded jeans, clean work boots, and a navy jacket whose sleeves had been carefully repaired more than once. Then everything changed. A tall man wearing an expensive tailored suit stopped beside their row without speaking. Behind him stood a flight attendant whose smile had already disappeared before she opened her mouth. "Sir," she said carefully, "I'm afraid there's been a seating adjustment." Nathan looked up calmly. "A seating adjustment?" The attendant hesitated only briefly. "Mr. Richard Caldwell requires these seats." Richard Caldwell barely acknowledged Nathan's existence. He glanced toward Lily for less than a second before checking the gold watch on his wrist. "We're already running behind," he said flatly. "Let's not waste everyone's time." Several nearby passengers looked over. One quietly shook his head before returning to his laptop. Another exchanged an uncomfortable glance with his wife, but remained silent. Lily turned away from the window. "Daddy, aren't these our seats?" Nathan looked at her before answering. His voice never changed. "They were." The attendant shifted awkwardly. "Sir, we'd appreciate your cooperation." Nathan slowly stood, reached into the overhead compartment, removed their small carry-on bag, then helped Lily climb into the aisle. He did not argue. He did not raise his voice. He simply took his daughter's hand. Lily hugged her rabbit tighter. "Did we do something wrong?" she asked softly. Nathan gently squeezed her shoulder. "No, sweetheart. Sometimes grown-ups make decisions. That's all." Richard immediately slid into seat 2A without another word, while his assistant occupied the seat beside him. A few quiet laughs drifted from somewhere farther back in the cabin. Nathan heard them. He showed no reaction. Instead, he reached into his jacket, removed his phone, and typed a single sentence before pressing send. The message contained only 8 words. He slipped the phone back into his pocket just as the aircraft door began to close. 5 minutes later, before a single engine had started, the cockpit door suddenly opened. The captain stepped into the aisle with a face that had completely lost its professional smile. Behind him, 2 airport operations officials and a Federal Aviation Administration inspector boarded the aircraft together. The inspector looked across the first-class cabin once before speaking clearly enough for everyone to hear. "Ladies and gentlemen, this aircraft is no longer authorized for departure. Every passenger in first class must immediately leave the airplane." Silence swallowed the cabin. 6 hours earlier, Terminal C at Houston Intercontinental Airport moved with the steady rhythm of thousands of travelers chasing departures, connections, business meetings, family vacations, and promises waiting somewhere beyond the clouds. Rolling suitcases clicked across polished floors. Boarding announcements echoed through the high ceilings. Fresh coffee drifted from crowded cafes where people glanced at watches more often than menus. Flight 428 to Seattle stood at the end of the concourse, scheduled to depart at exactly 9:30 that morning. It was one of Skybridge Airlines' flagship routes, carrying corporate executives, government contractors, technology investors, and frequent travelers who expected every detail to unfold without delay. Victoria Hayes intended to make certain it did. At 34, she had spent the last 5 years transforming Skybridge Airlines from a struggling regional carrier into one of the fastest-growing premium airlines in the country. She believed discipline solved nearly every problem. Schedules mattered. Procedures mattered. Appearances mattered. Every employee understood one rule above all others: never disappoint premium passengers. That philosophy had earned impressive profits, glowing financial reports, and the loyalty of wealthy travelers whose business kept expanding every quarter. This morning carried even greater pressure. Representatives from several investment firms were flying aboard Flight 428 before attending an afternoon strategy conference in Seattle. Every executive at Skybridge wanted the trip to leave perfectly on time. Down on the arrivals level, Nathan Brooks stepped out of his aging blue pickup truck and walked around to open the passenger door. Lily climbed down carefully, still holding her stuffed rabbit beneath one arm, while balancing a tiny backpack almost as large as her shoulders. Nathan smiled as she looked toward the enormous terminal building with wide eyes. "It is bigger than my whole school," she whispered. Nathan laughed quietly. "It feels that way sometimes." He locked the truck, lifted their single carry-on bag into his hand, and together they walked toward the entrance. Nathan had not flown in almost 8 years. Airports had once been ordinary places in his life. Now they felt unfamiliar, louder than he remembered, brighter than necessary. He never mentioned that to Lily. This trip belonged to her. During the past 3 years, he had quietly built every dollar toward one simple goal. He wanted his daughter to remember something besides hospitals, funeral flowers, and long nights when both of them pretended everything would eventually become easier. Seattle offered whale watching, mountains, museums, and 3 uninterrupted days together. That was enough. At the self-service kiosk, Lily watched the boarding passes slide from the machine. "Does first class mean we are rich today?" she asked. Nathan smiled while kneeling beside her. "No, it means somebody saved for a very long time." She studied the tickets carefully before placing them back into his hand, as though they were something fragile. "Then we should not lose them." Nathan gently tapped the tip of her nose. "That is an excellent plan." Neither of them noticed a black luxury sedan stopping outside the premium entrance on the upper level. Richard Caldwell stepped onto the curb, surrounded by 2 assistants already answering phone calls before the driver had closed the rear door. He rarely checked into flights personally because someone else usually handled every inconvenience before it reached him. Delays irritated him. Waiting irritated him even more. As his assistant reviewed the seating assignment on a tablet, Richard frowned for the first time that morning. "My preferred seat is unavailable?" he asked. "Yes, sir," the assistant answered cautiously. Seats 2 Alpha and 2 Bravo were assigned several weeks ago. Richard looked toward the terminal doors without slowing his pace. "That will be corrected before boarding." Neither the assistant nor anyone walking beside him questioned the statement. They simply followed, assuming that, as always, someone else would make room for the man who never accepted the word no. Richard Caldwell had built an entire career around one assumption. Rules existed for ordinary people. People with enough influence simply chose different outcomes. By the time he reached the premium lounge, 3 airline supervisors already knew his name. One recognized him from television interviews. Another had personally handled his reservations before. The third simply saw the platinum membership card and understood that saying no could become tomorrow's problem. Richard accepted a cup of black coffee without looking at the employee who handed it to him. "My assistant informed me there has been a mistake," he said calmly. "Seats 2 Alpha and 2 Bravo belong to me." The customer service supervisor glanced at the reservation screen. "Those seats have already been assigned, sir." Richard stirred his coffee once. "Then assign different seats." The supervisor hesitated. "The passengers purchased those tickets several weeks ago." Richard finally looked up. "Do you want me explaining this conversation to your executive office?" Silence answered before the supervisor did. "Please allow me a few minutes." Upstairs on the executive floor, Victoria Hayes had just finished reviewing the morning departure reports when her chief customer experience manager entered carrying a tablet. "There is a seating issue on Flight 428. Victoria continued signing documents without looking up. "Mechanical? No. Weather? No. Then what is it?" The manager cleared his throat. Mr. Richard Caldwell wants 2 different first-class seats. Victoria stopped writing for the first time that morning. Can we accommodate him? Only by moving another passenger. Victoria leaned back. Will those passengers still receive first-class service? Yes. They would simply move farther back in the cabin. She nodded once. Resolve it. We cannot delay boarding over 2 seats. She returned to the next report without asking whose seats would be taken. 10 minutes later, boarding began exactly on schedule. Nathan and Lily entered with the first priority group, smiling politely at every employee they passed. Lily counted airplanes parked outside each window while Nathan listened carefully as she invented names for each one. She called the largest jet Cloud Giant. The smallest became Little Falcon. Nathan laughed more during those 5 minutes than he had in weeks. He wished time would slow down. It did not. After Richard boarded, the lead flight attendant received a final message on her company tablet. She stared at the screen for several seconds before taking a slow breath. She knew the passengers sitting in 2 Alpha and 2 Bravo had done absolutely nothing wrong. She also knew exactly whose instruction had authorized the change. She walked forward carrying the professional smile every airline employee learned to wear when delivering bad news. Nathan looked up as she stopped beside him. Her eyes revealed the apology before her words did. Sir, I am very sorry for the inconvenience. Nathan listened quietly. Around them, several nearby passengers had already stopped talking. Business travelers always noticed unexpected conversations in first class. Richard remained standing beside the aisle with one hand resting on the overhead compartment. He never looked toward Nathan. To him, the outcome had already been decided. Lily slowly lowered her rabbit into her lap. She sensed something changing even before she understood what it was. Nathan glanced once at the boarding passes resting inside the seat pocket, then back at the flight attendant. May I ask why? He said politely. The attendant lowered her voice. I was instructed to relocate your reservation. Nathan waited a moment before speaking again. Was there a problem with our tickets? No, sir. Did we violate any policy? No, sir. Nathan nodded gently. I understand. The flight attendant looked almost relieved that he had not argued. She did not realize his calm came from something entirely different. Nathan reached into his jacket pocket, touched his phone for just a second without unlocking it, then quietly helped Lily stand. She searched his face before asking the only question that mattered. Are we still going to Seattle, Daddy? Nathan smiled softly. That depends on decisions people have not made yet. The flight attendant blinked at the unusual answer. But before she could respond, Nathan looked toward the front of the aircraft one final time, as though noticing something everyone else had completely missed. The moment Nathan and Lily stepped into the aisle, he glanced once toward the aircraft's forward service panel, then toward the open cockpit door where 2 mechanics had briefly exchanged a few quiet words before disappearing back onto the jet bridge. Most passengers would never have noticed. Nathan did. Years of paying attention had taught him that the smallest irregularities often appeared long before anyone admitted a problem existed. He did not stare. He did not interrupt. He simply remembered what he had seen. Lily slipped her small hand back into his. Daddy, where are we sitting now? She asked. Nathan looked around the cabin before answering. We will find out in a minute. The flight attendant escorted them several rows farther back, apologizing again as she pointed to 2 seats near the middle of the aircraft. They were comfortable enough, but they were not the seats Nathan had legally purchased. He helped Lily settle beside the window, placed her backpack beneath the seat, and buckled her seat belt with the same patience he showed every day. She smiled anyway. I can still see the wing. Nathan smiled back. That is a pretty good view. While Lily watched a baggage cart drive beneath the aircraft, Nathan quietly unlocked his phone beneath the tray table. His thumb moved across the screen with practiced confidence. There were no long messages, no angry complaints, no photographs. He opened a secure application that had not been used in months, entered a short reference number, selected the flight number, and submitted a brief notification consisting of only 1 sentence and 1 digital verification code. The transmission took less than 5 seconds. When the confirmation appeared, he locked the screen and slipped the phone back into his pocket as though nothing had happened. Across the cabin, Richard Caldwell had already forgotten Nathan existed. He accepted a glass of sparkling water before departure and joked with his assistant about another meeting waiting in Seattle. That is how service should work, he said with a satisfied smile. Problems disappear when competent people are involved. Several nearby passengers nodded politely without really listening. At the same time, inside the cockpit, Captain Michael Turner completed the final departure checklist while his first officer reviewed electronic dispatch documents. Everything appeared routine until a soft alert sounded from the aircraft communication terminal. The first officer frowned. "Captain, we just received a priority operations message." Michael turned his chair slightly. "Maintenance. Negative. Weather. Negative." The first officer read the header again, his expression changing. This originated from the Federal Aviation Administration Verification Network. Michael reached for the display. The message contained only a handful of words. "Verify passenger relocation authorization immediately. Departure hold pending confirmation." He stared at the screen for several seconds. "That is unusual," he muttered. He picked up the cockpit radio. "Ground operations, this is Flight 428. We have received an unexpected verification request. Can you confirm?" A pause followed. Then another voice answered, noticeably more serious than before. "Flight 428, remain at the gate. Do not close out departure paperwork. Additional instructions are coming." Michael exchanged a puzzled glance with his first officer. Outside the aircraft, the jet bridge operator, who had already begun preparing for departure, suddenly received a call ordering him not to disconnect from the aircraft. Down in the operations center, computer screens changed from green to yellow beside Flight 428. Supervisors who had been discussing routine schedules suddenly gathered around one workstation. Nobody understood why a simple seating reassignment had triggered a federal verification request. Upstairs in the executive office, Victoria Hayes was halfway through another meeting when her assistant quietly interrupted. "Ma'am, operations needs you immediately." Victoria looked up, surprised by the urgency in his voice. "What happened?" He swallowed before answering. "We are trying to figure that out. Flight 428 has just been placed on an administrative departure hold, and nobody seems to know who started it." Within 3 minutes, the calm rhythm inside the terminal had completely changed. Ground crews who had already begun preparing the aircraft for pushback were suddenly told to stand by. The fuel supervisor received instructions not to release the aircraft. The baggage team paused the final loading confirmation. Every screen in the operations center continued flashing the same yellow warning beside Flight 428. Administrative departure hold. Richard Caldwell noticed the delay almost immediately. He looked through the window toward the jet bridge, then pressed the flight attendant call button. "Why are we still sitting here?" he asked. The attendant maintained her professional smile. "We are waiting for operational clearance, sir." Richard frowned. "Operational clearance for what? I do not have that information yet." He glanced at his assistant. "Call executive customer service." His assistant dialed immediately, speaking quietly before ending the conversation less than a minute later. "They are checking, sir." Richard leaned back impatiently. They had better move quickly. Several rows behind him, Lily looked toward Nathan. "Are we late now?" Nathan shook his head gently. "Not yet." "Will we still see the whales?" she asked. Nathan smiled. "That is still the plan." Lily accepted the answer without another question and returned to watching raindrops begin forming on the edge of the wing as light clouds drifted over the airport. Nathan remained perfectly relaxed. His breathing never changed. His eyes quietly followed every new movement outside the aircraft. 2 airport operations vehicles had parked near the gate. Another supervisor walked briskly down the jet bridge carrying a tablet instead of the usual departure paperwork. None of the passengers seemed to notice except Nathan. Upstairs, Victoria Hayes entered the operations center where conversations had become noticeably quieter. "Talk to me," she said. Daniel Price turned one monitor toward her. The departure hold came directly through a Federal Aviation Administration verification channel. Victoria crossed her arms. "For a seating dispute? That is what we thought." And now, Daniel zoomed in on the notification history. The verification request specifically references a passenger relocation authorization. Victoria frowned. "Who requested the relocation?" Daniel hesitated for a brief moment. "We did." Victoria looked directly at him. "No. I approved accommodating a premium passenger. I did not authorize violating any procedure." Daniel nodded carefully. "That distinction may become important." Before Victoria could respond, another notification appeared across the screen. Federal Aviation Administration inspector assigned. Estimated arrival 4 minutes. The room fell silent. Victoria stared at the message. An inspector is physically coming here? Yes. For one delayed flight. Daniel slowly nodded. Apparently so. Back inside the aircraft, Captain Michael Turner opened the cockpit door and stepped into the galley where the lead flight attendant was waiting. Has anyone become disruptive? He asked. No, Captain. Medical issue? None. Then why is the Federal Aviation Administration sending an inspector? She quietly shook her head. Nobody knows. At that exact moment, Nathan noticed a white government vehicle stopping beside the jet bridge outside his window. He recognized the agency markings immediately, but showed no reaction. Lily followed his gaze. Who are those people? She whispered. Nathan looked at her with the same calm expression he had worn all morning. People whose job is to ask questions before everyone else stops asking them. Across the cabin, Richard's phone rang. He answered with complete confidence. Yes. His confident expression slowly disappeared as he listened. What do you mean they cannot override it? He stood up, lowering his voice but unable to hide his frustration. I do not care who issued the hold. Fix it. He ended the call without another word. For the first time that morning, Richard Caldwell realized there was someone involved whose authority exceeded his own. Seconds later, the aircraft door opened again, and 3 officials stepped aboard carrying identification badges that immediately silenced the entire first-class cabin. The 3 officials walked aboard with the quiet confidence of people who never needed to introduce themselves twice. The lead inspector displayed her credentials to Captain Michael Turner before speaking in a calm, measured voice. Rebecca Collins, Federal Aviation Administration. We are conducting an immediate compliance review regarding this aircraft's boarding authorization. Every conversation inside the cabin stopped. Richard Caldwell stepped into the aisle before anyone else could respond. I have an important meeting in Seattle, he said firmly. How long is this going to take? Rebecca acknowledged him with a brief glance, but did not answer. Instead, she turned toward the lead flight attendant. Please provide the boarding manifest exactly as it existed before any seat changes were made. The attendant hesitated for only a second before handing over her company tablet. Rebecca compared several entries with another document carried by one of the operations officials. Her expression remained unreadable. Beside her, another inspector quietly asked Captain Turner, Did you receive confirmation that the passenger relocation met the required authorization procedure before boarding continued? Michael answered honestly. I assumed the gate had completed every required approval. Rebecca looked up. Assumptions are not part of compliance, Captain. Her tone was professional rather than critical. She simply stated a fact. Richard folded his arms impatiently. Surely this is excessive over 2 seats. Rebecca finally faced him. This review is not about comfort, sir. It is about whether mandatory procedures governing passenger records and operational authorization were properly followed. Richard frowned. Then speak to airline management and let us leave. We are speaking to everyone involved, Rebecca replied. At the rear of the cabin, Nathan remained seated beside Lily. She leaned closer and whispered, Daddy, are those the questioned people? Nathan smiled gently. Yes, sweetheart. Are they angry? No. Good investigators usually stay calm. Lily nodded as though that explanation answered everything. A few moments later, Victoria Hayes boarded the aircraft alongside Daniel Price. The confidence she had displayed throughout the morning had been replaced by visible concern. She walked directly toward Rebecca Collins. I am Victoria Hayes, Chief Executive Officer of Skybridge Airlines. How can I assist? Rebecca handed her the tablet. Can you confirm who approved relocating passengers from seats 2 Alpha and 2 Bravo after boarding authorization had already been issued? Victoria looked at the screen, then quietly answered, I approved accommodating a premium customer. I did not personally review the passenger record. Did anyone verify whether changing those seats required additional operational approval? Rebecca asked. Victoria remained silent for several seconds. I believe my staff had followed procedure. Rebecca closed the tablet. Belief and verification are different standards. The words landed heavily. Around the cabin, passengers who had assumed this was a simple delay now exchanged uneasy looks. Even the flight attendants stood quietly, realizing the issue had become far larger than customer service. Rebecca turned toward the operations official beside her. Please escort every first-class passenger into the gate area while we complete documentation. Richard immediately objected. This is ridiculous. Rebecca met his eyes without raising her voice. Sir, every first-class passenger includes you. One by one, travelers gathered their belongings and stepped into the aisle. Nathan calmly lifted Lily's backpack onto his shoulder while she carried her stuffed rabbit. They moved without complaint, just as they had earlier. Victoria noticed the father for the first time since boarding began. Something about his composure caught her attention. Most people delayed by unexpected investigations showed frustration, confusion, or irritation. Nathan showed none of those. As he passed Rebecca Collins, she glanced at his face, then looked down at the verification report in her hand. Her expression changed almost imperceptibly. Mr. Brooks, she said politely. Nathan stopped. Yes. Rebecca offered a respectful nod. Once the cabin is clear, I would appreciate a private conversation with you before anyone else leaves the gate. Nathan looked down at Lily before answering. Of course, he said softly. We will be right here. Lily smiled and sat beside the large terminal window, hugging her stuffed rabbit while watching mechanics move. Beneath the aircraft, she seemed completely unbothered by the delay. To her, the airport was still an adventure. Nathan walked a few steps away with Rebecca Collins, stopping near the gate desk where the surrounding conversations faded into the background. Rebecca studied him for a moment before extending her hand. It has been a long time, Mr. Brooks. Nathan accepted the handshake with a polite smile. It has. Victoria Hayes, standing only a few feet away, looked from one face to the other. You know each other? Rebecca nodded. Very well. Victoria waited for an explanation that never came. Instead, Rebecca turned back toward Nathan. I honestly did not expect to see your name appear in an active verification request. Nathan gave a quiet laugh. Neither did I. Rebecca folded her tablet beneath one arm. Your authorization code is still valid. That surprised several people in Washington this morning. Victoria frowned. Authorization code? Rebecca looked toward her. Mr. Brooks was one of the senior specialists responsible for developing the passenger compliance verification process currently used by commercial airlines during operational reviews. Victoria stared at Nathan, convinced she had misunderstood. She looked at the man wearing repaired boots, carrying an inexpensive backpack decorated with a little girl's keychain, and quietly asked, He designed part of the system? Rebecca answered before Nathan could speak. Not part of it. Some of the verification protocols that triggered today's review were originally written by him and his team. Daniel Price blinked in disbelief. That cannot be right. Rebecca opened her tablet and displayed an archived personnel record. Nathan Brooks, Senior Federal Aviation Administration Safety Systems Investigator. Special Assignment Division. Victoria slowly read the information twice. You worked for the Federal Aviation Administration? Nathan nodded once. A long time ago. Why did you leave? Victoria asked almost without thinking. Nathan looked toward Lily, who was happily waving at a baggage tug driving across the ramp. His expression softened immediately. My wife became seriously ill. After she passed away, my daughter needed a father more than the agency needed another investigator. Nobody spoke for several seconds. Daniel quietly lowered his eyes. Rebecca finally broke the silence. He never resigned because he lost his qualifications. He resigned because he chose his family. Victoria felt an unexpected weight settle across her shoulders. She remembered approving the seating change without asking who occupied the original seats. She remembered assuming every passenger could simply be moved if someone wealthier requested it. Now she realized she had never once looked beyond a reservation number. Nathan noticed her expression and offered a calm smile that carried no trace of resentment. Everyone makes decisions with the information they have. Victoria looked at him in disbelief. After everything that happened, you are not even angry? Nathan shrugged gently. Being angry would not help Lily enjoy her first vacation. Before Victoria could respond, another operations supervisor hurried toward Rebecca carrying a printed report. Inspector Collins, he said, slightly out of breath. The records review found something else. Rebecca accepted the documents and quickly scanned the pages. The calm confidence on her face disappeared for the first time that morning. She looked directly at Captain Michael Turner. Captain, your aircraft is not being held because of a seating dispute anymore. Michael stepped forward. Then why? Rebecca slowly closed the report. During this review, we uncovered a separate maintenance documentation discrepancy that should never have passed final clearance. If this verification request had not been triggered today, Flight 428 could have departed before anyone discovered it. Silence settled over the gate area as Rebecca Collins lowered the report. The conversations that had filled the terminal only minutes earlier faded into nervous whispers. Captain Michael Turner accepted the maintenance file with both hands, carefully reading each page before looking back at Rebecca. "How did this get through final review?" he asked. Rebecca answered honestly, "We do not know yet. That is exactly why this aircraft is not leaving until every document and every inspection item has been verified again." Victoria Hayes closed her eyes for a brief moment. Her airline had built its reputation on precision. Now she stood watching a federal investigation unfold because one unnecessary decision had exposed a much larger problem hidden beneath the surface. Nathan remained quiet. He had no interest in proving anyone wrong. His only concern was the little girl sitting by the window, still counting airplanes with complete confidence that her father would make everything all right. Rebecca looked toward Nathan again. "Mr. Brooks, I know you no longer work for the agency, and I am not asking you to perform any official duty." Nathan nodded. "I understand. But since you helped design the verification workflow, I would appreciate your opinion on something before we continue." Nathan hesitated for only a second before agreeing. "If it helps everyone travel safely, I will take a look." Victoria watched him in disbelief. Most people would have refused after everything that had happened. Nathan simply stepped forward without mentioning the seats, the embarrassment, or the wealthy passenger who had pushed him aside. Rebecca handed him the maintenance summary. Nathan read slowly, never rushing through a single line. After less than a minute, he pointed toward one digital signature near the bottom of the page. "There." Rebecca leaned closer. "What do you see?" Nathan traced the timestamp with one finger. The inspection was electronically certified before the replacement component arrived from inventory. Captain Turner looked surprised. "That is impossible." Nathan gently shook his head. "Not impossible. More likely someone completed the paperwork early, expecting the installation to be finished before departure. The physical work may be correct, but the documentation sequence is no longer valid." Once the verification system detected another irregularity, it expanded the review and found this inconsistency. Rebecca compared his observation with the maintenance log. 30 seconds later, another inspector confirmed it through the central database. "He is exactly right." Victoria slowly released the breath she had been holding. Daniel Price stared at Nathan with open admiration. "You found that in less than a minute." Nathan returned the report. "Experience teaches you where mistakes usually hide." Rebecca smiled for the first time all morning. Some skills do not disappear. A maintenance supervisor hurried toward the group carrying updated paperwork. "The replacement component was installed correctly," he reported. "Only the certification timeline was entered out of order. We have already completed a new inspection and verified every step." Captain Turner reviewed the corrected documentation before nodding with visible relief. "Then the aircraft is safe." "Yes," Rebecca replied. "Now it is." Richard Caldwell, who had listened from several feet away, suddenly realized the full meaning of what had happened. The delay that had disrupted his schedule had also uncovered an error that no one had previously noticed. For the first time since arriving at the airport, he had nothing to say. Victoria walked toward Nathan, her voice noticeably softer than before. "Mr. Brooks, today you protected my passengers without asking for recognition, without demanding an apology, and without reminding anyone how badly we misjudged you." Nathan looked toward Lily as she laughed at a plane lifting into the bright afternoon sky. "Children learn more from what we do than from what we say," he answered quietly. Before Victoria could respond, Lily ran over holding her stuffed rabbit with a bright smile. "Daddy," she said, pointing toward their airplane. "Does this mean everybody gets to go home safely now?" Nathan smiled as he knelt beside Lily and gently tucked a loose strand of blonde hair behind her ear. "Yes, sweetheart," he said. "That is exactly what it means." Lily hugged her stuffed rabbit against her chest and smiled with complete satisfaction. Then it was worth waiting. Her simple answer settled over the small group more heavily than any speech could have. Rebecca Collins quietly looked away for a moment before smiling. Even Captain Michael Turner lowered his head with quiet appreciation. Victoria Hayes stood silently, realizing that the little girl understood something many adults had forgotten. A safe flight was always more valuable than an on-time departure. 20 minutes later, after every maintenance record had been corrected, every inspection repeated, and every compliance document verified, Rebecca signed the final authorization. Flight 428 is cleared for departure, she announced. A wave of relief spread through the gate area. Passengers applauded softly. Ground crews returned to their positions. Boarding resumed once again. Before anyone entered the aircraft, Victoria stepped in front of the boarding lane. "Mr. Brooks," she called. Nathan turned around while holding Lily's hand. Victoria walked toward him carrying two newly printed boarding passes. "These belong to you." Nathan accepted them politely without looking down. "Thank you." Victoria took a slow breath. "I owe you something much more important than new boarding passes." She looked directly into his eyes. "This morning I made a decision based on status instead of fairness. I never asked who you were. I never asked whether the decision was right. I simply assumed that the customer with the most influence deserved the better outcome. I was wrong." The entire boarding area became quiet again. Employees who had worked beside Victoria for years had rarely heard their chief executive officer apologize publicly to anyone. Nathan answered with the same calm voice he had used throughout the day. "What matters is what happens after we recognize a mistake." Victoria nodded slowly. "Then let me begin by correcting mine." She turned toward the gate agents. "Effective immediately, no passenger at Skybridge Airlines will ever be relocated from an assigned premium seat without documented approval that fully complies with federal procedures and company policy. No amount of status or influence will change that." Several employees exchanged surprised looks before quietly nodding. Rebecca smiled with approval. "That policy will save your company more than you realize." Just then Richard Caldwell approached. For the first time all day, there was no confidence in his expression, only quiet reflection. He stopped a few feet from Nathan. "Mr. Brooks," he said, "I judged you before I knew anything about you. That was my mistake." Nathan offered a small smile. "I hope your meeting in Seattle still goes well." Richard almost laughed at the unexpected kindness. "After today, I think I have more important things to think about than one meeting." He extended his hand. Nathan shook it without hesitation. There was nothing left to prove. As boarding resumed, Victoria personally escorted Nathan and Lily back to their original first-class seats. Lily climbed into the window seat and looked at her father with bright blue eyes. "Daddy, are these our seats again?" Nathan looked at the boarding pass before placing it in the seat pocket. Then he looked back at Lily. "Where would you like to sit?" Lily thought for a moment before smiling. "Right here, because wherever I sit with you is already first class." Victoria quietly turned away, blinking back tears she had not expected. Captain Turner welcomed every passenger aboard once more, and exactly 32 minutes after the unexpected delay began, the aircraft finally pushed back from the gate. As the airplane lifted above the clouds, the morning's argument over two seats had already become something much greater. It had reminded an airline that integrity could never be upgraded, reminded a wealthy businessman that respect could never be purchased, and reminded everyone watching that true character was revealed not when life treated someone fairly, but when it did not. Nathan looked out the window as Lily rested her head against his shoulder and slowly drifted to sleep. He smiled quietly, knowing she would probably remember the whales, the mountains, and the adventure waiting in Seattle. He also hoped she would remember one lesson that no boarding pass could ever print. The best place in the world is never the most expensive seat. It is the place where kindness, humility, and doing the right thing always arrive before pride.